All right, so my article is titled Gender Differences in Access to a Sports Dietitian Influence Dietary Habits of Collegiate Athletes. And so the introduction talks about how there's a gap in the literature looking at sports dietitians' effects on college athletes' nutrition, eating habits, their dietary habits, and the introduction also talks about how there's a gap in the literature looking at comparing men and women athletes, student athletes, to one another and their dietary habits. There's not a lot of research on that. And the purpose of the study was to look at the effects of a sports dietitian on dietary habits for student athletes, and then also to compare men and women student athletes to one another and see how their dietary habits are similar and or different. And so the methods, there was 383 total student athletes, and 240 of them were women and 143 were men. And they took a 15-minute survey consisting of questions on dietary habits and practices. And the topics included eating habits, breakfast habits, hydration habits, nutritional supplementation use, pre-workout nutrition, post-workout nutrition, and nutrition during team trips. So there was a lot of different aspects that the survey covered, but it was basically just a 15-minute survey looking at like the athletes' dietary habits, and the results showed that it compared participants who basically, there was a sports dietitian on campus at 2 campuses, and those students were the ones that partook in the research. So they had the choice to either go to the sports dietitian or not go to the sports dietitian. And so the researchers compared the athletes that went to the sports dietitian to the athletes that didn't go to the sports dietitian, and found that the athletes that went to the sports dietitian ate significantly more boxed breakfast, lunch, or dinner meals when they were on team trips, and the athletes without the sports dietitian ate more fast food on these trips. And then they also post-workout meals, the athletes that did go to the sports dietitian had more options available, they reported. And they reported like more protein and carbohydrate sources after talking to the sports dietitian. And then it also compared men versus women athletes, and this showed that the men were reported trying to gain weight more often than the women were. The men consumed more fast food during a 7-day period. They also consumed more restaurant prepared meals during a 7-day week, and women prepared their meals more often than men did. And then men also drank alcohol during the season and the off season more than the women did, the female athletes did. Men also drank more soda on the weekend and energy drinks. So the women kind of did a better job with their nutrition. They ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days per week. They reported more often than men did. Those are the comparisons between the men and women athletes. So the take home, I would say, is like the women utilized the sports dietitian more effectively than the men did. The women had more healthy and more productive eating dietary habits, and which obviously leads to better performance. So the women were doing more for their performance than the men were. And the limitations of the study, they mentioned that the sports dietitians were on the campus, and they posted like bulletins and were posting things on social media. So maybe some of the athletes that didn't go directly to the sports dietitian could have seen the bulletin boards or the social media posts and discovered the tips that the dietitian was giving them, although they didn't directly go to the dietitian. So that's one of the limitations. And then another one is let's see. There could have been report biases on the survey where they could have just basically lied about their eating habits just because, and they call it it's just a bias on the survey. And my question for the class is, were you surprised by these results? Specifically, were you surprised by the results maybe that men drink more alcohol during the season, male athletes than female athletes? And also, maybe were you surprised that the female athletes did a better job with the sports dietitian and had healthier and more productive eating habits? Yeah, so those are my questions. All right.